Hello, good evening and welcome to the program. This is Daily Politics live on Trust TV, your hub for everything politics, policy and governance. My name is Abdullahi Ahmed. Tonight on the program, we dive into the brewing clash between 16 state governors or state governments and Nigeria's top anti-corruption body, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC. The governors are challenging the agency's existence in court, citing constitutional loopholes, but civil society groups are pushing back hard, calling it a blatant attempt to protect corruption and cripple accountability in the country. As Nigeria continues to grapple with the deep-rooted menace of corruption, this legal showdown could be a major blow to the fight against graft. Is this corruption fighting back, as some have aptly put it? Well, joining me to break down the stakes are Elechenu David from the Center for Democracy and Development. Alongside him is Victor Agi of the Center for Fiscal Transparency and Public Integrity. Of course, gentlemen, good evening to you both, and thank you so much for joining me on the program tonight.
Thank you very much for having us.
Right. Okay, to set the ball in motion, let's listen into Shafiu Suleiman's report on the collective position of the civil society organizations in Nigeria who held a press briefing to give their take on this developing issue. His report.
16 governors recently approached Nigeria's apex court to challenge the existence of the nation's anti-corruption body, the EFCC. They asked the court to stop the agency from investigating and prosecuting them on allegations bordering public finances. However, in a swift reaction, civil society groups working to fight corruption and ensure good governance came together to push back the governor's gang-up, describing it as a deliberate attempt to legitimize corruption and undermine the commonwealth of the citizens.
The action of these 16 governors and their silent collaborators, because even the other governors have not come out openly to say that we disassociated ourselves with these 16 governors, so which means that they are doing solidarity. And if they are not doing solidarity, we challenge them, let them come out to disassociate themselves from these 16 governors that are trying to make or legitimize looting, corruption, and all sorts of irresponsible behavior, financial recklessness in their state.
Weakening or abolishing any of these anti-corruption agencies will significantly erode Nigeria's democratic gains, encourage impunity, and discourage foreign investment, as investors rely on strong institutions to ensure a fair business environment.
The coalition is also worried over attempts by subnational leaders to undermine the Supreme Court judgment on local government financial autonomy, just as they condemned votes allocation and leadership selection during the recent local government elections in some states.
The financial autonomy of our local government councils is non-negotiable. It is a constitutional provision that must be respected by all tiers of government. We stand united in condemning any action by state governors that undermines this autonomy and call for strict adherence to the rule of law.
We call on the federal government, the National Assembly, and other relevant anti-corruption agencies to institute and enforce appropriate sanctions against any government official at the state level who continues to flout financial autonomy of local governments.
While they call for increased oversight in the utilization of public resources, especially at the subnational level, the coalition also wants Nigerians to join them in pushing back the dangerous narrative aimed at silencing the anti-corruption fight in the country.
Shafiu Suleiman there, capturing the thoughts of the coalition of civil society organizations in Nigeria who have made it clear that they are on the side of the EFCC, or at least on the side of the anti-graft agencies in the country vis-a-vis their support for local government autonomy, which is also yet another sore debate between the federal government and the subnationals who are pushing back on the attempts to grant those autonomies based on some legal technicalities. So the gentleman with me here in the studio, of course, I have Elechenu David from the Center for Democracy and Development. Alongside him is Victor Agi of the Center for Fiscal Transparency and Public Integrity. Gentlemen, once again, welcome to the conversation. Victor, let me start with you. Your take on what the collective of these civil society organizations that you are also a part of are trying to achieve. Some would say this is subjudicial because the case is in court. So why are the civil society organizations jumping into this arena?
Well, thank you very much once again for having us. Of course, it is subjudicial, and we are not actually speaking to the merit or demerit of the case. We are just basically letting the public, I mean Nigerian citizens, know that their governors have actually taken the federal government to court to say that the EFCC lacked jurisdiction over the affairs of their state, over accountability and transparency in terms of how their resources are being used. And so we are not detecting to the Supreme Court, what the case or what they should do with the case. We are simply calling on Nigerians to join the civil society voice. We are calling on the media, of course, which is what you are doing, to join the civil society voice in calling attention to the fact that this move is currently ongoing. Beside what happened today at the press conference, many Nigerians do not even know that governors have actually taken this kind of action, and it speaks to accountability and transparency, which are supposed to be bedrock of a democratic system like ours. And so part of the problems we have today as a country is the failure of transparency, is the failure of accountability, where you give governors money and they don't want to account for it, because that is exactly what they are saying. Because if you check today, how many state governors actually have anti-corruption agencies, to check what they are doing, beside what the state houses of assembly is, constitutionally empowered to do, which we all know they are not doing, beside what the judiciary also is empowered to do, which we also know they are not doing. And so coming out to say that the EFCC, the NFIU, the ICPC shouldn't have jurisdiction over how they actually spend our money is absurd, really. And this is what we are really saying. And so we are not addressing the merit or the demerit of the case at the Supreme Court. We are simply calling Nigerians to be aware. We are calling them to know that this is what the steps the governors are taking at this point. Of course, when I said at this point, you know what the situation in the country is currently. Coming over to this place, I was at the filling station to refuel, and I know how much I buy fuel. So at this point where the inflation figure are above 30%, I mean, as at September, I think it was 34.3 or thereabout percent. At this point where everyone is crying of what to eat, our governors shouldn't shift attention to frivolous issue, because that is what we describe it as, wanting to evade accountability. Why should we give you money and you don't want to account for it? Because that is exactly what they are asking for. Right. So what we are simply saying is that the citizens should be aware. These are the steps being taken by their governors in this.
The legal councils of the state governments would disagree with you, say that's a misrepresentation of their case, because they're clearly basing it off of constitutional provisions. They're talking about doing the right things the right way, and they are saying that the formation or the creation and establishment of bodies like the EFCC, for instance, does not meet the requirement. But let me come to you, Elechenu. Let me get your thoughts on what some would say is a vote of confidence on the anti-graft agencies or community in Nigeria. Is that essentially what the CSOs are doing? Because you've pitched your tent with the likes of the EFCC and the NFI. Is this tantamount to a vote of confidence on their operations?
All right, thank you very much for having me. And I would like to start by saying that although the anti-corruption agencies may have their faults, but I would like to take it from a perspective of citizens, accountability, and to also lay the foundation that accountability have tools. And EFCC, NFIUs, all the anti-corruption agencies are tools for accountability, including citizens. Where we pitched our tent is about how that citizens should be active enough to become that tool that can be used for accountability, right? So if you're saying that the structure that are in place currently are those tools that can be used to ask for accountability from government, from stakeholders and office holders, lack those jurisdiction to carry out their responsibilities and duties, then it's like saying, just like my colleague said, that you don't want to account for the position that you vowed for. And that is where we come in. All right? So we won't say that they don't have their faults. We are not where we are, even in Nigeria currently, but we understand the structure for accountability and transparency, for democracy and development, and which all these structures are in place to account for all of it. And we are heading somewhere, but we're not there yet.
So how do you respond when people on the side of the state governments say this is only trying to get clarity on the constitutional provisions? If we have to do things, we have to do it the right way based on laid down rules and regulations as contained in the Nigerian constitution. That this goes against what the constitution provides for, some sort of concurrence at the state assemblies before acts like this
be ratified.
Are ratified. So to be ratified by the state assemblies, and that was not done back in 2004 when the Obasanjo administration, with good intention, came up with the idea of EFCC and later the ICPC and everything else. How do you counter that argument that this is only trying to set the record straight about what is right and what is wrong, regardless of the intentions?
All right. Part of the questions that were asked during the session was also in that line. And what we came up to agree to say is that we're not pushing any narrative. Before we would have the legislature, the judiciary, or to take the judiciary to make a stand. No. What we are saying is that citizens should be aware that all these things are going on, and they should be aware in terms of is it right or is it wrong, and what are the ways to go. Like I said earlier, we have structures in place. We are not there yet, but we are heading somewhere. And all of us, together in unity, had to make sure that we have these structures that hold governance accountable. Thank you.
Yeah, and let's bring it back to David. Does it not seem like your groups, everybody involved in this particular idea of pushing back against this 16 state governments, and also I think it's something that has to be clear. It's not just the government, it's not just the governors, it is the state government as an institution that is challenging the position.
Absolutely.
So where do the governors come in? I mean, obviously they are the ones running the show. However, if the instrumentality of the state is being used to challenge this, don't they get the benefit of doubt that this is an institution, a tier of government that is challenging the existence of an agency under the control of another tier of government, which is the federal government?
We all know how the system works. Of course, this particular case was instituted by the Attorney Generals of the state. And so the Attorney General does not have any power to institute such case without the governor sanctioning it. And so by extension, whether it is the Attorney General on behalf of the state or the governor directly, it is the governor playing, because the governors are the chief executives of the state. And so that is why we can't exonerate them from this.
And are you assuming that they're doing so because of personal interest and not because of the interest of their states?
Obviously, we can say that, because we also need to look at where the suit is actually emanating from. Actually, the governor or the government of Kogi State actually started this case, and you know what it has been, over the period with the former, the former governor of Kogi State and the EFCC. And so for them to actually start this case, institute this case at this time, where the former governor is being pursued on alleged, misappropriation of fund in the state, it shows one thing. It shows that the governors have come together to find a way to evade accountability, and which is what we are letting the citizens to know. And to answer your question about whether what the position of the law is concerning this, whether the Supreme Court will allow the Supreme Court to actually interpret that portion of the Constitution. But you also have to understand that at the time where the act was passed, the EFCC Act in particular in 2004, we were at a crossroad as a country where we want to show to international community that we are actually willing to fight corruption. And so doctrine of necessity may have actually come to play in the passage of this particular act. And of course, it has undergone, amendment over the years. So the point really is that the Supreme Court will actually interpret what it is with the act, that established the ICPC, of course, the EFCC, NFIU, and other anti-corruption agencies. But the point again is that we are not picking on the governors. We are simply saying to the citizens, this is what your governors are doing when the prices of fuel is 1,030, the official price, from NNPC, which I bought this evening. We are simply saying that when the cost of commodity food items is skyrocketing, this is what your governors are interested in. So we are simply saying that why not
do the governors get to bear the brunt of what's going on with the economy?
Because they receive federal allocation every month. As at the last count, I checked and I discovered that over 3 trillion has been sent to the state coffers from January to August, when I checked the last time.
Taking into account inflation and everything, but when you talk about the economy, and if you're trying to rope in the governors on this one, when we talk about price of PMS, for instance, how do the subnationals take responsibility for that? Because at the heart of the conversation about the spiraling economy that we're dealing with are federal reforms. Because we do know that the federal government is in charge of running the national economy.
Absolutely. Before now, I just mentioned that they have received about 3.2 trillion since January. But before now, they wouldn't have received as much. Because of the reform, of course, the removal of subsidy, the monies that accrue to them has also increased over the period. And so we are not saying that inflation is not affecting their spending as well, but we are saying that the one that you have received, what have you done with it over the period? So if they were receiving 200 billion, every month before now, it has increased to about 400 billion every month, now. So we expect that things should change. And so we expect that regardless of the inflationary pressure, there should be some level of governance at that level. We are not even talking about the local government. Before now, they have been receiving both the state and the local government funds, which they do not even account for. But we are even saying that the ones they have received since, the removal of fuel subsidy, what have they really done, with it? Because the undoing is for us to focus on the federal government, only. While we should focus on what the federal government is doing, we should also pay attention to what the state governors are doing, so that the pressure will not only be on the federal government, because we have 3 tiers of government, and each is supposed to independently run and manage state resources to the benefit of the citizens.
And actually, are we saying, is the civil society organization community saying that there is no validity whatsoever to the argument that the state governments are making about constitutional provisions, for instance, that if we have to do anything worth doing is worth doing well? And they're basically saying, even with the local government autonomy conversation, because it is also a part of the issues that was addressed, and we'll get to that in a moment, that listen, stop cutting corners, stop going through the back door. If you have to fix it, if you need a constitutional amendment to get things done, do the right thing. The executive orders are a flagrant violation of certain constitutional provisions, like the joint account, for instance, which is a constitutional provision that the state governments have constantly used to say, listen, you cannot bypass these constitutional provisions because you're trying to achieve local government autonomy. But on the case of the legality, I know we pointed out the whole ratification issue of the state assemblies. Is it the position of the civil society organizations that there is no merit whatsoever to the case? Because the state governors are saying we don't want to fight corruption. They're simply saying there is a violation of constitutional provisions.
Well, just like I said earlier, we would leave that to the Supreme Court to decide. But just to lend also my voice to say that all these are coming in play to let us also know the loopholes in our system. Not for us to sit back and say, okay, all is well. Before now, a lot of us Nigerians wouldn't understand the way that laws and policies are being passed in this country. And it is also a call, or a wake-up call, to also let us know that, look, before anything happens, in terms of policies, in terms of laws, there is the aspect of the citizens to also participate in making these things happen. And to also build that aspect of citizens to say, okay, now this thing is happening. Like my colleague said, about how that attention is being shifted from the core issues of how things are affecting the common Nigerians to things that benefit some few. Is also a wake-up call too for citizens to begin to pay attention to the things that would definitely affect everybody in terms of the policies, the laws, and how things are enacted in the country.
I mean, we talk about passing a vote of confidence earlier, but has EFCC overall, since 2004 today, some 20 years now since its formation, has it been the disruptor that we expected, within the polity to make a difference? Because it is the foremost anti-graft agency. I know we still have the ICPC, the NFIU on one side, but have Nigerians gotten value for money in terms of the operations of the EFCC, taking everything into consideration since its inception? All right,
there are plenty narrative to these things, and one is just like you said, and it's not out of play. But the main issue is the EFCC playing a part in terms of not eradicating now, reducing corruption in Nigeria? If it is yes,
what do you think the answer is?
Well, these are discussions, right? And the EFCC is an anti-corruption agency, and it is meant to play that role. We are working very close with the EFCC, and we believe that there are some certain issues that need to be resolved in terms of how the ICPC chairman and all of that is being chosen, just to give them the autonomy, the structure they deserve to carry out their work independently, right? All these issues are there. We won't take them out, but the main issue is, do they play a part in the reduction of corruption in the country? If it is yes, then let us find a way of making sure that the structures are in place to make them work independently and very well. Thank you.
So, and obviously, we don't know. We can't preempt what the Supreme Court is going to say or do with regards to this particular suit. But looking at your arguments, for instance, you talk about how the bedrock of this whole anti-corruption fight itself is embedded in Section 15, subsection 5 of the Constitution, where the mandate is that it is the role of the government to abolish all corrupt practices and abuse of power. And one might argue that, do you necessarily need EFCC to do that? The answer could be yes or no. But in terms of collaboration, you did talk about how the state governments have, gone to sleep to some extent. Not all of them, but we do have some states that have come up with their own anti-corruption commissions or agencies to address some of the gaps that they have within the system. It varies from one state to the other. I mean, what is peculiar about these 16 states that are plaintiffs in this particular suit, and what does that say about what is going on in their states, if you can comment on that?
Well, what I was doing an analysis before this press conference vis-a-vis Transparency and Integrity Index. That index actually ranks public institutions in terms of their compliance with access to information legislations. And we released the report, the 4th edition, by the way, last week. And one of the things that we have discovered is the fact that state governors, including those ones who are actually plaintiffs in these suits, and of course, all of the state governors, are really not doing well in terms of transparency and, of course, integrity and accountability to the people. And so out of the 36 states, only Kaduna scored above the average, 51.3% thereabout. The other states, the following states, actually Ondo or thereabout, scored about 36, and that is the trajectory. And so we are not even singling out those states who have actually joined these suits. Generally speaking, accountability is weak at the subnational. And these state governors should pay more attention to how they can actually strengthen accountability in those states. You are aware of the conversation around domesticating the FOI. Up to today, some states are still contesting whether the FOI should apply to them until there was a Supreme Court judgment, I want to believe, that mandate them to actually domesticate FOI. Should we be telling state governors to actually domesticate FOI? These are conversations that we should have in terms of getting the state to be more accountable to the people.
Isn't that what you get in a federal system? that these subnationals don't necessarily have to play ball with everything the center wants.
But what are they doing, in their respective state to strengthen accountability, to get the citizens to even approach them, to get the citizens involved in governance? When they are not doing anything, then we have to rely on what is available to hold them accountable. And so, for instance, you talked about the anti-corruption law. Apart from Lagos State, and then one other state, I can't remember any other state that has an anti-corruption agency.
I think Kano has the PCACC. Yes, exactly.
There are just handful of them that actually have anti-corruption agencies, checks put in place to hold them accountable. So we have to rely on what is available to hold. The national institutions like the EFCC, ICPC, NFIU are what we can see, to actually use in holding them accountable so they can't run away from it.
Let's talk about the politicization of some of these government agencies, right? Because there have been several concerns since the inception in the early 2000s when EFCC came on board, and we've seen the kinds of people that have been targeted, and for the most part the commentary was that it has become
like a watchdog.
Yeah, a hunting dog, so to say, for political persecution. And this is reminiscent of what is currently ongoing right now with the Kogi State situation involving former Governor Yahya Bello, because that is the position of the current state government, that listen, what is going on is not in any way, shape or form an anti-corruption fight. Yahya Bello is being persecuted because he did not support the current president during the campaign season and so on and so forth. And this is not the first time we're hearing things like this. Isn't it time for us to have that kind of conversation, how we can insulate agencies like this, whether at federal or at state level, so that they can fully operate without the overbearing political influence of the powers that be who are currently in charge of the government?
Well, like I said earlier, I agree with you totally. But like I said earlier, all these things are playing so that we see the loopholes in our system. And this one is bringing one to the fore for us to actually look at it. And like, just like we all agree that the EFCC and all of these agencies are there like a watchdog or a hunt dog for the powers that be in power currently, or whenever they are in power. It goes to also show how these agencies are being constituted. For instance, we are talking about how the independence of these agencies should be and how they should carry out their work independently. So these are the issues, not necessarily looking at how that you begin to challenge the authority of why these people are in place or these agencies are in place to fight corruption. So let's go back to the real issue. Are they here to reduce or eradicate corruption? Are they put in place to make sure that there are accountability in terms of even prevention before the action, before we begin to investigate? So all these are the issues. So let's go back to the policy, let's go back to the laws, let's go back to looking at how all these laws we put in place to make sure that all the accountability issue, transparency issue, and building active citizens at the community level to come to the fore for citizens to also begin to hold governance accountable.
You're saying no matter how you flip the coin, you're going to end up realizing that EFCC, NFIU, ICPC is a force for good, regardless of the technicality involved in the conversation.
It is a force for good.
Right.
That's where my opinion personally stands, and it is how we walk our way from there that matters to me.
Okay. Clearly, 16 out of 36 is not a complete majority, but you get a sense that there is, a common denominator there. States like to feel as independent as possible from the center, even though they're not necessarily independent. They are part of the big picture. Let's talk about collaborative efforts in the fight against corruption. What do you make of the journey so far? Because when the Obasanjo administration came up with EFCC, a lot of the governors were not particularly happy because they saw some of their compatriots being picked immediately after they leave office, or even some of them while they were still in office. There were several issues of whether the governor is immune from, charges like this, for instance. Do you think that we have moved the needle in terms of seeing the big picture of needing to fight corruption collectively between the two tiers that matters the most, which is the federal and the state?
I wouldn't say we have. because, of course, if you check, and like you have established, most people think that the EFCC and, of course, other anti-corruption agencies, they are just
tools of the federal government.
Of the federal government to actually enchant perceived enemy politically. And so we have not made so much effort, in terms of having them as independent body, who are willing to fight corruption regardless of where your political leaning is. And so this is a conversation that we must continue to have, the independence of these anti-corruption agencies, giving them the structure, the system, for them to work effectively. We have not been able to achieve much with that over the years. But like we have said, just imagine a Nigeria without an EFCC. Imagine a Nigeria without the ICPC or the Bureau of Public Procurement.
A lot of people will say that Nigeria was much more productive. Life was much more affordable then.
Oh, well, I wouldn't want to join those who say or who are actually thinking that the military era was better, because I wasn't even part of the military era, so I don't really know what life was at the time. But democracy has proven to be the best form of government. And if we can imagine a life without an EFCC today, in 2022, I was part of the UNCAC review, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption review by the UNODC. And one of the things that I took from that conversation was the fact that over 2,000 cases were prosecuted by the EFCC alone in that year, 2022. Over 2,000 cases. Well, we'll have to also have the conversation about what constitutes that 2,000 cases. But the fact is that they were able to prosecute over 2,000 cases. So imagine in Nigeria where those 2,000 cases were not prosecuted, you can imagine the level of corruption that will bring. And so while I am not advocating that the EFCC or any anti-corruption agency should continue being a tool of the government in power, I am saying that if we can even make progress, where we have a government in power using the EFCC and the ICPC to effectively fight corruption within the opposition, would have made some progress. But what we have today is not in that picture. We have the EFCC. Of course, we don't even want to start talking about the leadership of the EFCC, for instance, over the period. We know what happened to their leadership over the period. And so we don't want to go into that conversation. The conversation and the point we are making today is that Nigerians should be aware of what their state governors, are doing currently in the face of the hardship, in the face of the suffering, in the face of the hunger that we have in the land. Nigerians should be aware, but there is need for improvement in terms of collaboration between the state and the federal government, in terms of how these anti-corruption agencies can actually function more in the fight against corruption.
And how do we achieve that handshake between the federal and the state through some of these agencies, for instance? Because every now and then you get a sense that there's always a clash, and this particular case signposts that while in principle they might agree we need to fight corruption, they differ on how to go about it, jurisdictional issues, for instance, and so on and so forth. What does this suit say about, the collective principle of really fighting corruption? Because it's not just these 16 states. The others who might not necessarily be a part of this suit might also have some very unfavorable ideas about the way the EFCC is operating, about the NFIU, and the attempt to attain local government autonomy. What does this say about the dysfunction within the system itself?
What I would say concerning that is the fact that the Constitution clearly states how and where collaboration comes in. For instance, just to take you a little bit back about how that the act of enacting the EFCC came in through the United Nations Convention and all of that, and it was ratified due to our international presence. And of course, any law, policy, and amendment in the Constitution that has to do with the state would have to be ratified by the state. That's also another provision for collaboration. So You know, the former Senate president used to always say something that our constitution is embedded in our culture and our tradition. So it is not necessarily everything that comes from up that should be ratified down. That's basically his own thought anyway. But the ratification of these laws, policies, and amendments that should go through the states is also necessary because of acceptance and collaboration. And over time, this is what we have seen, right? And this, like I said earlier, is an eye-opener. It's a loophole. And for us, it is a call to active citizenship, because the moment it goes to the state, it means that you're bringing governance closer to the people. And that's also the clamor for the local government autonomy, because the moment it leaves the state government level, it goes to the local government for a closer reach for people to begin to make input into all these things. So the ratification, nobody can take it out of it. It is basically that point where you have that collaboration between the state and the federal government, and it should be encouraged at every point.
Now let's bring in the conversation about local government autonomy, because you all had a lot to say about that and how the governors have emasculated the local councils to a point where it is no longer fit for purpose. And this past couple of weeks have been interesting, to say the least, since the Supreme Court pronouncement about local government administration, the abolishment of the idea of caretaker committees, for instance, which is now illegal, and we've seen these state governments organize council polls to fill in the vacancies that have been created, from the fallout of that ruling. But also, we've seen past administrations. The Buhari administration came with Executive Order 3, trying to bypass the state governments and fund the local governments directly. The Tinubu administration went that same route, but of course, got a significant boost with that Supreme Court ruling. Is it fair to say that the governors are the ones standing in the way of local government autonomy, especially looking at our constitutional provisions?
I would go back to look at what our constitution say concerning all of this, right? So we have the section for the constitution that actually made provisions for joint accounts and how that the local government should be run at a particular level from the state. And so even when the law was passed 11 July, of course, all of us were happy. But on the other hand, for some of us who know in depth what exactly these laws are and how that there is still the provision that has to do with the autonomy of finance still being embedded in the joint account, it means that the autonomy is not autonomy at all. So it also goes back to begin to, for us to build the citizens, the activeness of citizens in terms of what is this local government all about? How can it benefit us? And what exactly are we looking for out of this? If that's the case, the governors are not, they are not the embargo between the federal government and the people actually. It is actually what made them stand in that gap. And that for me is the amendment of those constitutions, those policies, and we should actually define it and move away in moving governance closer to the people.
Good intention, a lot of people say, is not enough in terms of making a difference, because the way you go about executing that intention really matters, especially when you're dealing with the law, right? And so many people have said, listen, while the federal government's attempts at trying to attain local government autonomy is admirable, the way they're going about it is akin to putting the cart before the horse. Because while that provision is still there, you cannot really attain local government autonomy. So you have to go back to the legislation itself and all of that. So what do you make of this back and forth, knowing fully well that the answer lies with the constitutional provisions that have still not been amended?
Yeah, recently the Senate president actually came out to say that they will do all they can to ensure local government autonomy. And of course, they are the representative of the people. And so if we are having that kind of support from the Senate, from the National Assembly, it will push for some of these amendments. Excuse me. I'm aware that constitutional amendment is currently ongoing, and so we expect the Senate and of course the House of Reps to push for the amendment of that portion that actually specified that joint account, because that is where the loophole and the backlash is actually coming from, But beside that, I think that Nigerians and the governors especially should be interested in good governance. Are we saying again that sending money directly to the local government council is a wrong idea? Are the governors saying that if a local government has direct access to the funds from the federal allocation, is actually a bad idea? I don't think it's actually a bad idea. And so they should be interested in good governance. They should be interested in dividends of democracy for the people who they represent.
There is also a mistrust between the federal government and the state governors or the state government when it comes to management of finances? Do you think this is coming from a level of mistrust, and that's why they feel they need to bypass the state governors so they don't have access to these funds? Or where is this coming from? Because the state governors have argued. I mean, we've had several proponents of the state governments who say, listen, they're going about it the wrong way, because institutionally there are quite a lot that you don't have at the council level, whether it's a civil service commission and all of the other governmental institutions that you need for the local governments to function just like the state government, that you don't have. That in terms of administration, the state government still administers a significant part of the local government. So if you're not addressing that as a core part of the problem, financial autonomy is not going to give you what you're looking for.
Well, and that is why the amendments really has to come to play to really put structure to some of these things. But speaking to mistrust, the mistrust is not just between the federal government and the state governors. It's actually between the governors and the citizens. As a matter of fact, every Nigerian is from a local government. And so we know what exactly happens at those local governments. After the July 11 judgment by the Supreme Court, we still saw how a particular state, or your state, I think, came out to say that regardless of the judgment, when they receive the money, they will pass it over to the state governor, who will now decide how the monies will be spent. That can't continue to happen. So the mistrust is not just between the federal government and the state governors. It is between the governors and the entire Nigerian, the entirety of the citizenry, who have not seen dividends of democracy, who continue to question what is happening at the local council. I'm sure if you visit your local government headquarters today, you know what it is like. And it is the closest to the people. And so if we have a government that is the closest to the people, being underfunded the way it is today, not being able to manage resources that are legally accrued to them, then there is a problem. But I agree that there should be some kind of harmonization in terms of structure, putting structure to how the funds should be managed, because some of the systems are actually run by the state government.
Right. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about one of the governors who's also in the news this week for making a statement in respect to local government autonomy. The Anambra State Governor, Charles Soludo, raised concerns over granting full autonomy to Nigeria's 774 local government areas, saying it could lead to humongous chaos. He was, of course, saying this while signing this week the Anambra State Local Government Administration Law. Now, going straight to the quote, he said absolute autonomy for 774 local government areas is an impossibility and a recipe for humongous chaos, and the challenges that come with local government autonomy could worsen the situation and harm the intended beneficiaries if not properly planned. So it's safe to say that a significant part of the argument is the planning aspect, that this financial autonomy doesn't answer all of the questions. And without proper planning, it could backfire. So what, in your view, can be done better in terms of administration? Because at the end of the day, the elections that we've had across some of these states, some who have not had elections in local government for over 10 years, some 14 years, I think Anambra State is also one of those states that haven't had council elections in a while, is that you end up having government proxies, or the governor's proxies, or his stooges. I know they don't like those terminologies, but people who are subservient to the governors in local councils, and the whole exercise is in futility, because when you have laws like the one he signed right now, which allows for the local councils to legally remit some of their funds into a consolidated account so that it will be used for the commonwealth and development of the state. I mean, these are all back doors that the state governors could use. So how do we truly attain local government autonomy with the buy-in of the state governors in such a way that it doesn't look like you're trying to get them out of the way?
Yeah, I actually listened to that conversation, and he actually made some points, like saying that, of course, the local government do not have their judiciary system. It means that if you want to go by the local government autonomy, they should have a judiciary system in place to take care of their interpretation of laws and all of that. And he also said about so many issues. He said he came in as governor and had the opportunity to have backlogs of salaries that had to be paid that were accrued from the local government. So if there is local government autonomy now, who is going to pay those backlogs? And you know, those are issues, right? And we're not taking that out of place. But we just need to start from somewhere anyway. And here we are with the local government autonomy. And we walk our way from here then. Now, the state governors being sincere and how did you put it? The mistrust between the state government and the federal government is actually not with the federal government, just like you said. It's actually with the people. The attempt.
I mean, do Nigerians trust any government, whether local, state, or federal?
Yeah, and the more it push closer to the people, the more the trust is no longer at the center. It goes to the state and goes to the local government. So the issues will no longer be pushed to the federal government as much. We look at the center as per the kind of power it carries. And the more it goes from the state to the local government, we no longer place attention on the state, rather to the local government that it is. And so these are the laws, right? And this is what the Supreme Court have said. And since they are the Supreme Court, it is supreme. So we walk our way from here then.
Right.
Now, this for us as civil society organization is what we are pushing for. And like we said, we won't have it in one blow, but we'll continuously push our way from there to make sure that we have active citizens holding governance accountable and a better society where we can participate in democracy and development together. Thank you.
During the presser, you also identified council elections, expressing your doubts, concerns about the quote-unquote manipulated elections that are subpar, that lack quality, integrity, and credibility. There is also a conversation about the national body, which is the Independent National Electoral Commission, stepping in and conducting these council elections. Is that going to be the panacea? And do you also see a pushback there? Because the state independent electoral commissions are also legally constituted to take charge of council polls.
Well, personally, I don't think that the INEC should conduct local government elections. I think we should move towards having what some people call true federalism, where the state governors can act independent and actually oversee some of these things to the best of their ability. And that is the narrative that we want to push. I personally do not think that the INEC should conduct state elections, but of course, what we have seen over this period is calling for that, But I think really, one of the ways we can address all of the problems at the local government elections is when citizens are interested in the process. The past elections has actually shown that the citizens are really not interested in the process yet. And so I think that we need to build awareness. We need to get people to be aware of the fact that there's now local government autonomy, meaning that the local government chairmen are going to have more money. And so if you are not interested in who become the chairman, it means we are now empowering another 774 corrupt politicians who will flate the money, and then we'll be back to square one. And so the citizens need to be aware, and that is the central message in what we are doing, in all that we are doing regarding the press conference that we have, that the citizens need to be part of this process. you need to be part of the elections at the local government. I can imagine that I'm in my local government, I'm not be interested in the elections. So people should be aware and be interested in the election. Because when people are interested in elections, it makes it more difficult for the politicians to rig, for us to have, what we have been having as elections over the period.
All right. Gentlemen, interesting conversation. That is all the time we have for this episode of the program. But thank you most kindly for your insight and, of course, for your contribution on this all-important conversation. Thank you very much, Victor and Elechenu. I really appreciate you for stopping by.
Thank you very much for having us.
That's our show for you tonight. Thank you most kindly for joining us. Daily Politics will be back tomorrow, live and exclusive as always on Trust TV. Feel free to follow us across our social media platforms to stay in touch. You can also visit our website, trusttv.com, for the latest news, programs and documentaries. My name is Abdullahi Ahmed. From myself and the rest of the team, thank you for your time and good night.